test. We say we must not pay any divorce payment to the EU nor contribute to the EU budget. We must have been paid our share of financial assets from entities such as the European Investment Bank, in which we have some £9 billion. Well, it's obvious, isn't it, that she's going to fail this test rather badly. It seems like we'll be paying about £40 billion. In 2019 and 2020, we'll be paying into the EU budget at the same level we would as if we were a member, and then there'll be a kind of long tail of payments mainly related to sort of residual pension obligations. On the other hand, 40 billion is a lot of money, but if we just remained in the EU permanently, over the 20 or so years the 40 billion gets paid, we'd have chucked in a couple of $100 billion. So it's a lot less than that. And trying to be charitable, there is a theory that the government's dangling this money, so the EU, which likes spending money, sort of chalks it as future revenue and is left vulnerable, that they'll have allocated this money to spending projects. So if at the 11th hour there's a hitch in the agreement, that the prospect that we would walk away with no deal and not giving them a penny of the 40 billion would give us huge leverage, and then they would have to back down on whatever the issue might be. Perhaps one thinks again of that Northern Ireland border issue. But it's kind of investing a lot of hope and confidence in the government that doesn't really appear to be justified given what they've achieved so far. So on the money test, and because of that potential silver lining, I can give them 3 out of 10. And then the final test, which has sort of become one of the most important, and we clocked the risk early on that the government would leave in name only and have some kind of extended sort of shadow membership of the EU. So we said, given this is what we said originally a year or so ago, before we knew there was going to be a general election in 2017, we said, given David Cameron held the referendum so early in the government's term, it's reasonable to expect the process to be completed well before the next general election. To go into the 2020 election with loose ends left untied or an open-ended transition still in progress would risk plunging the country into a new era of uncertainty and emboldening those who wished to overturn the referendum result. That's unacceptable. So Brexit must be done and dusted before the end of 2019. Now, obviously, since then, Theresa May called and sort of failed to win a general election when she started out 20 points ahead. But that means the next general election is looming in 2022 if the current Parliament runs to time. But of course, this is exactly what has come to pass, the proposal for a transition. And a week or so ago, the fact of it likely to be open-ended, we seem to have made a breakthrough on that. And it was actually the EU that said it wanted the transition to end by December the 31st, 2020, which, if we really look on the bright side, means a very good New Year's Eve for us all that night. But that's not written in stone, that final date. And some people in Brussels think the government, under pressure from the big corporate sector in Britain, will come and ask for extra time. And perhaps they'll be willing to give a bit of extra time in return for yet more concessions on things like the amount of money we're paying to leave. So it hasn't quite been nailed down, but it's very good that we have at least a public target date of the end of December 2020, because if she slides from that, it will be again very embarrassing politically for the Prime Minister. Initially, she talked about 2 years, and Boris Johnson said it mustn't be a day over 2 years, but Philip Hammond said it could be longer than that. So we've got to a stage now where they've named a date that will be 21 months after we formally leave in March next year. I think we're a year and 3 days away from the moment we formally leave the European Union. So because we have got that date, and it's early enough not to get caught up in the next general election, so long as Parliament runs its course, we seem to have avoided the big danger, which was the transition would still be rolling on by the time the manifestos came out for the 2022 election, and the new manifestos would supersede all the pledges on Brexit that the two big parties gave in 2017. So that seems to have gone by the wayside, that danger. But as I say, the danger is now that Britain will end up asking for that to be extended. And the big downside of the transition as it's been agreed is it's basically not an implementation period, it's a non-implementation period. We're signed up to all the obligations of EU membership, we'll be paying into the budget as if we're members, we'll be under the rules of the common fisheries policy as if we're members but without a seat at the table. We'll be under freedom of movement obligations in the same way, and we will have no direct influence. We won't have a commissioner, we won't have any MEPs, and we'll be relying on the good faith of the government not to push for a further extension of that. It's a sort of limbo land situation. So it's a sort of balanced news on that one. I could only give them 5 out of 10, and that gives a total score on Brexit of 26 out of 60, which is lower than the highest I think it's ever got to was 29. There was a moment before Christmas when it looked like they were going to call for us to stay in the customs union when we got down to 17 out of 60. But it's, you know, well below a 50% score, and certainly what you used to get on your report of must do better would be the teacher's verdict. And the big danger is that we've seen Theresa May give ground on so many things already, and that we're not even yet at the real crunch point of the talks. And if she turns out to be, you know, lily-livered, as some people call her, Theresa the Appeaser, then that score has got capacity to drop down a lot lower. It's just possible, as I say, the government would use the fact of this £40 billion that they need and we've got to really toughen up their approach in the final weeks of negotiations. There's also the looming vote in the House of Commons and the House of Lords, probably in October, on whatever agreement she comes up with, and it's just possible that one or other House of Parliament will try and torpedo that. And if that were to happen, legally the position seems to be we would leave without a deal next March, and actually there's much to be said for that. But I'm afraid, knowing how the establishment works, some kind of bodged extension of Article 50 would be at least as likely an outcome. So overall, I think it's sort of not gone well. It's not a total disaster. There are some things that we can be very proud of. I still think when we formally leave on March the 29th next year, all being well, it's an enormous moment, even though it will be in name only until the end of this non-implementation period, and when we really take back our sovereignty and use the sovereignty that we've got back. But nonetheless, once we're out, I think the other side will have a devil of a job even to get to the point of holding a referendum to try and get us back in, and that's why they're playing such hardball at the moment and trying to put so many sticks in the spokes of the wheel and wreck things. So let's not get too downcast. Let's remember we achieved an amazing result in the middle of 2016, and the idea that's being pushed by these Remainers now that somehow Leave cheated, when Remain had the government on their side, the Treasury, the Bank of England, £9 million on a government leaflet to every household, Barack Obama, the BBC, just about everyone on their side. David beat Goliath. I think we'll get there, but there's a lot of work to do, and we have to keep up public opinion and public knowledge on the state of the talks. And that's my main sort of lecture, as it were, tonight. And I'd now like to introduce someone who's been a stalwart friend of UKIP in the East of England, done many of these meetings with us over the years, and a real star of UKIP and one of our most talented communicators, and has come here again tonight. So I'm absolutely delighted to welcome to the stage Suzanne Evans.